Well, I think there are many issues to talk about. First, there's the U.S. Attack and invasion and occupation. You know, because the country had nothing to do with 9/11, really. And then we can talk about the current government crisis, the financial crisis, people's living conditions, how this past year has been the bloodiest since the war began in 2001. 2001, and talk about the people, the poverty, the degradation, the violence, the insecurity, you know, the lawlessness, the crime and criminality. So we can talk about Afghanistan sort of being shredded right on live camera.
And the reason that I am bringing up Afghanistan for a full show tonight instead of going through all the news is that a lot of people are focused on the news, the debt ceiling, this issue and that issue. But I really don't feel, Zahir, that most people understand Afghanistan and understand the proper context. So hopefully tonight we can go over some basics about this country that of course has been in the newspapers just about every day for the last 10 years, even although things have been going on in Afghanistan for a very long time.
Every day, yes, but especially the last 10 years. You know, last year the Pew Research Center did a study. The mainstream media allocates about 3% of the space and time to the war in Afghanistan. And this is a war where the United States has at least 100,000 troops. Altogether there are about 130,000 troops now, and then there's one contractor for every one of these troops. There are 46 countries, troops from 46 countries waging war on this poorest and least developed country in the world. The U.S. alone is spending about $10 billion a month. So far we have spent $500 billion on this war since 2001. And the current budget, this year's budget for the war is about $120 billion. So, and about 2,000 Americans have been killed, 15,000 wounded, and tens of thousands of Afghans have been killed and maimed, and yet there's very little coverage of it. And most Americans seem to be unaware of it. The connection to be made between the economic crisis in America and the crisis in Afghanistan. So there's a direct connection because a study came out from Brown University, and it's a very powerful, very compelling study. And they're saying that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the total direct and indirect costs amount to about $4 trillion. For this country. So that is a lot of money. And so Americans do need to be concerned, but Americans also need to think about, you know, that the Afghans don't deserve this. You know, they don't deserve the death and destruction and the war and violence that is being imposed on them. But from the Afghan side, you know, people now put these things together. You talked about racism and so forth. I would say people would now say that the West is now waging war on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya. 6 countries, soon perhaps to be Iran too. So other people, and thoughtful Americans too, put these things together. So I think we're not only talking about white supremacy and racism and how the wars, in these imperial wars, are the external face of white supremacy, but also people talk about Islamophobia. It's not a coincidence that the West is now waging active war on 6 countries who happen to be Muslim, but also which happen to have resources, energy resources. So the ruling class in this society is looking for scapegoats. That's what you're saying. Because we're in big trouble here. I mean, I think this society is in deep trouble, and not just economically, I would say, the culture, the institutions, you know, street life, etc. We are in big trouble. But the thing to do is, I think, to go back to 9/11, and that is because many people, Americans, think that they can't tell the difference between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And I want to make it very, very clear, and this is now declassified materials coming out of the State Department, that Afghanistan as such had nothing to do with 9/11. 9/11, as you well know, was, you know, launched by 19 Arabs, 17 of them from Saudi Arabia, and 3, I think, from Yemen and other places. And we also need to remind our viewers that Al-Qaeda, in a sense, is a product of the CIA and the ISI and the Mukhabarat in Saudi Arabia. these three governments, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and the United States, put Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and the Mujahideen, the earlier generation, together. The point is that, that Al-Qaeda was in fact in conflict with the Taliban at the time. In just around 2001, before October 2001, there was actually a very serious conflict between the Taliban and the Qaeda, and my information is that the Qaeda, especially bin Laden, was under house arrest in Kandahar. What I'm trying to say is that to invade and attack Afghanistan was illegal, and it was wrong to begin with. And then to occupy a country for something that it had nothing to do with, is clearly a violation of international law, and it's a sort of a brutal act of brutality. And so if the United States wanted to deal with, if this is a war on terror, then terrorism is not, it's not a country, it's not a government, it's not a group. It's a phenomenon, it's a tactic, it's a strategy, and there are no Afghans. I mean, no Afghan has been involved in any of the attacks on the West, which is important, I think, to remind people. So why punish this whole country, which had nothing to do with the 9/11 or the subsequent developments and attacks?
I think it's probably safe to say that less than 5% of the people watching this show right now believe anyone from Afghanistan was involved in 9/11. In fact, well over 95% believe probably our own government, which saves us lots of time. So let's look at some of the factors that probably got them motivated to target Afghanistan. There's a few popular ones. One of them is heroin cultivation.
Yes.
The other one I read about was lithium, the use of mined lithium for cell phones.
And uranium.
Uranium.
But the more important thing, I think, is, I mean, many people have observed, including very thoughtful Americans, that the attack on Afghanistan and its occupation really has very little to do with fighting terrorism, that it has everything to do with oil and gas in this part of the world.
And Michael Rupert has talked extensively about that, the plans, well, Karzai, of course.
Yes, well, worked for the UNOCAL, President Karzai, and he still may be a consultant to UNOCAL. But also, when President Clinton was president, the United States and the Taliban government came this close to actually establishing diplomatic relations. UNOCAL at the time was actively pursuing, I know they trained people actually, they wanted to build this pipeline from Turkmenistan to Dawlatabad here, through western Afghanistan to this port here. So I would say that, but there are other reasons. So I would say that, one reason that we're not told why the United States and 46 other countries are in Afghanistan is the oil and gas in Central Asia, but also the oil and gas in Afghanistan. But furthermore, Afghanistan is very rich in other minerals like lithium, copper, uranium, gold, coal, etc. I mean, this is a very, very rich country. But also the passage of the pipeline from the Caspian Sea through western Afghanistan to the Arabian Ocean. That contract has already been signed, and the Asian Development Bank is going to be funding it. It's called TAPI, the TAPI airline, TA airline, the TAPI.
I think this is a note we may want to take, this Asian Development Fund, because we are seeing this rise of Asia and their influence growing, and not only in the Middle East, but Africa as well.
Well, yes, but I think the point is that the United States government, since the Clinton administration, has been very interested in building these pipelines to access and also to establish sort of control and hegemony in that part of the world, to deny access to China, Russia, India, Iran, and other people. So the main reason for the U.S. presence, and they're insisting on maintaining permanent air bases in 4 places, in Herat here, in Mazar-e-Sharif, in Jalalabad, and in Bagram. These 4 air bases have
main large super air bases.
They're expanding them, and there's every indication that they're planning for a permanent stay. But also, as we speak, Washington and Kabul are actually negotiating a long-term strategic pact.
One thing that I've noticed in the news, after many of these announcements from our current president, which is not so different than the last. We've seen these announcements about troop reductions, and shortly afterwards, some sort of a suicide bombing, where there's lots dead, many dead. And we're also seeing this in Iraq. Shortly after these announcements, we're going to pull troops back. All of a sudden now Al-Qaeda's upset and doesn't want us to leave. So who benefits from these villages being bombed and these shopping places, these bazaars being bombed?
Well, that's questionable because, again, you know, the idea with this goes back actually, the U.S. invasion and occupation of Afghanistan goes back to the Project for the New American Century, which we know was planned in the very early 90s, where soon after the dissolution of the former Soviet Union, you know, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Khalilzad, you know, Douglas Feith, etc., these people, you know, planned to sort of control, especially the Gulf states in the Middle East and Central Asia, because they saw no deterrence. And so you probably are aware of this, that in fact before the attack on Afghanistan was launched, there was a serious debate in Washington to decide whether to attack Afghanistan or Iraq first. And then they said, let's do Afghanistan first because it's going to be easy, and then we'll move on to Iraq, which is exactly what happened. Except that they didn't know that the Afghans would simply not accept being occupied and subjugated. And so the war is being lost right now. But also, just in the last week, some documents have been exposed that soon after the Americans arrived in 2001, and early in 2002, in fact, the United States sort of imposed an agreement on the Afghan government, signed by two ministers, the Minister of Interior and Foreign Affairs in Afghanistan, for permanent American presence. The point I'm trying to make is that the U.S. all along wanted to have a permanent presence, and now with the revolts of the Arab masses in the Middle East, the Arab Middle East, I think the United States would be looking for a more friendly, you know, smaller country to maintain its presence, and they think it's going to be Afghanistan. Except, you know, the Afghans simply would not accept foreign occupation.
What we could be looking at here with Afghanistan is something larger than minerals, something larger than resources, although it's a very big part of it, but strategic for the future wars of the world, potentially, with other potential threats that are, starting to build right now. This is very,
well,
very
you know, China,
Pakistan.
if you look at China here, Afghanistan has a border with China. There's something else going on, you know, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a military,
talk a lot about that here,
which is a military sort of economic organization, and it's really sort of the response to NATO. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization started about 10 years ago, as you know. It was just to be a cultural organization, but now they have military maneuvers, they have joined forces. It's just like NATO. One thing was that there was a civil war underway in Afghanistan before and when the Americans arrived on October 7, 2001. And that civil war was going on between the Pashtun South, essentially, and the Northern Alliance, the coalition of the minorities, the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, and so forth. So the civil war is going on, the Americans intervene, and they intervene on behalf of the Northern Alliance. And if you go to Afghanistan now, most of the important positions are actually occupied by members of the Northern Alliance. The vice presidents, for example. Karzai is a figurehead himself. He has no power. I mean, he's sort of like a hostage. But most of the important positions in the army, in the intelligence, in the police, in the government, in the embassies, are in the hands of the Northern Alliance, because when they moved in, you know, on the back of the tanks and B-2 bombers, they sort of took over, in fact, including homes and property and real estate in Kabul, but also all of the position. So there was a civil war underway, and that civil war is still sort of being fought, except now, instead of the Northern Alliance, the Afghans fighting each other, the foreigners are fighting part of Afghanistan on behalf of another part of Afghanistan. So the Taliban now, and I don't like to call it Taliban actually, because the insurgency now consists of all kinds of people, including the Hazaras, Tajiks, Uzbeks, which is to say that the vast majority of the people, and this was a study done actually by the International Council on Security and Development, which is a Belgium organization, the vast majority of the people now, regardless of their ethnicity, race, and region, want the foreigners out. But the foreigners have their own agenda, and they have their own interests, you know, and that is, as we said. So I think Afghanistan, in some ways, is being penalized for its strategic location, because it's at the hub. You can see it between Central Asia and South Asia, and then here the Middle East, very close to the Arab Middle East and Iran and all that. I mean, as you know, Alexander the Great spent 3 years, I think, in Afghanistan, and then the British. There were 3 wars between the Afghans and the British, and then Genghis Khan, Timurlan, all of these people, everyone has tried. But it's a strange place, even though it's very diverse ethnically, and there are many, many tensions and conflicts amongst the different groups.
Right.
But when it comes to foreigners, they tend to unite. And so right now, I mean, it's sort of common knowledge that the United States and NATO essentially have lost the war. That is, say, if you're not really winning against the guerrillas, you're losing. And this last year was the bloodiest after the 10-year war. That is, say, more Americans and more Afghans were killed than any previous year. In fact, May and June in July were the bloodiest months, which is to say, one of the things, the impression you talked about, the troop withdrawal, so-called. One, we must say, that the President Obama, the Nobel Peace Laureate, in fact, has escalated this war. He escalated the war, and he also expanded it to Pakistan, of course, but also these other countries over there. So what is happening now, of course, there's supposed to be a troop withdrawal, but they will go on. This will be until the end of 2014. But at the same time, the air war, the use of helicopters and drones and jet fighters has increased exponentially. That is, and also these night raids. This is one thing that really, really bothers Afghans, and apparently dozens and dozens of these take place all over the country. So while there's an impression created just to appease the American,
in reality, it's a Terminator film on steroids.
Yes. So you would draw a few troops, but non-essential people. But also the other thing that many people here don't know, that at one point, there were 150,000 troops from 46 countries, from New Zealand to Lithuania, from Poland to to Egypt, waging war on this poor, in very, very underdeveloped country. But the thing is that there are also contractors, about 150,000 civilian contractors, people who might do the laundry or feed the troops or use these drones. And some of these organizations like Blackwater, DynCorp, I think Armored North America, there are many, many of these major security companies with multi-billion-dollar, multi-year contracts in Afghanistan, and those are not even mentioned. So if there's a troop withdrawal, they're being replaced perhaps by civilian contractors, civilian quote-unquote, but also the air war has been intensified.
It has been intensified. On the topic of DynCorp, Cynthia McKinney brought up before Congress when she was confronting Rumsfeld on the issue about the sex trafficking that they had been caught engaged in Africa and elsewhere. I know this stuff is going on in the Middle East. I also notice there's not a lot of coverage of it taking place. They talk about sometimes sexual assaults when it's within the military on military. The stuff pertain to other things that might be going on. There's a lot of secrecy around that and a lot of lack of concern. How much more concern, though, do you think people that are unaware of it might be wanting to look at this issue? The idea that there are people that are disappearing from their homes and we know nothing about what's happened to them.
Well, I was just reading recently about human trafficking in Afghanistan. And also there was one group of one of the security companies. It was Armored something North America, and they were people who actually were protecting the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. And somebody leaked the tape to the press. And this security company, which was protecting the U.S. Embassy, was engaged in things that, say, junior high school students would do. Prostitution. But also I know reports by the U.S. State Department, the inspectors and the Government Accountability Office clearly document that some of these civilian contractors who are doing things in Afghanistan actually charge the American taxpayers for prostitutes. Prostitutes from Afghanistan, but also prostitutes from other countries, especially Eastern Europe, China, and Thailand. And so, but there is this human trafficking going on. People do disappear, boys and girls do disappear, women do disappear, whether it's for work, whether it's for fighting, whether it's for prostitution.
On if there's where the market is for this, or do you just see it just being sporadic?
Well, the market, I think, is, I mean, in Afghanistan itself, and I have heard, and I can't really document this, I've heard from Afghans who have worked with these foreign troops or contractors and so forth that they do take advantage of the Afghan women. And this is a country, you know, where more than half the population is unemployed. A country where the majority of the people are poor and live on $1 or $2 a day.
This is why Americans have to think about our own country. As we learn what happened to the third world, I think we need to look very carefully at our own country at times.
Yes, but think about how our money is spent in our trusts, but also think about some of these agencies now. I happen to know the brutality of the Blackwater in particular because the nephew of one of my students was killed. He was one of those people who was just going home from an English class and he happened to be in the wrong place. This was 2 years ago. And he was shot from behind, a young man, Rahib. But anyway, but Blackwater, which for example has been implicated, as you know, and actually fined, you know, for what it did in Iraq. I was just reading, you probably noticed that he is training actually a special commando force for the UAE, the United Arab Emirate. Not from Muslim countries, which is interesting. This was in the news quite a bit about a month and a half ago. He's training a special commando force for the UAE government, none from the Muslim country, because he said Muslims will not fight, shoot Muslims. This is, you know, for the UAE. And I was just reading, you know, that he has moved his headquarters to Washington, D.C. to be closer. But the important thing is that an organization like that, which has a terrible record, and which also has, you know, a record of cheating the U.S. government and the U.S. taxpayers, continue to sign multi-billion-dollar contracts. And also the important thing is that the Afghan police and the Afghan army and the Afghan intelligence people are trained by people like the ones who work for, say, Blackwater or Danco and so forth. And these are the types that they are. As it came out in the court, these are the types that believe that they are on a mission from God, that they are the reincarnated Knights Templar, which became the Freemasons, which became those that created the Great Seal and the dollar bill and founded this glorious, loving, peaceful country. So these people believe that they are of the ideology of the 13th century. And so that's what hopefully people are understanding tonight, that this is more than strategic, this is more than resources. There was a religious,
some sort of ideology.
Theological ideology, definitely. I mean, I think it's not a surprise, because if the reason was Al-Qaeda, everyone now, Robert Gates, you know, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, Petraeus, everyone is saying that there are no Al-Qaeda. Mike Mullen himself, I heard him say this, that there may be 50 or so Al-Qaeda. Now, you don't need an army, a superpower. You don't need 46 countries to be fighting 50 people. So there must be some other reason. And the Afghan government then and now, they have had nothing to do again with 9/11, and they have nothing against the American public or this country or the American government. And the Afghans have no agenda like the Qaeda. They just want to be left alone, and they just want their country. So you have to ask yourself, you know, what would be the reason why you have to stay there for 10 years, spend $500 billion so far, and continue spending $10 billion a month for an operation on a country and a people that have not harmed you in any way?
Right.
You have to ask yourself, you know, what would be the reason why you have to stay there for 10 years, spend $500 billion so far, and continue spending $10 billion a month for an operation on a country and a people that have not harmed you in any way?
Right. You know, these are very good things that we're bringing up tonight, because we need to think about each one of these things independently. And one thing I thought about recently about 9/11 is I think it's a test to see what else they can get away with. Because if they can convince a whole country that you have to take the risk of going into economic servitude for this little war that we're having, when they start saying things like that, you've got to wonder what it's really all about. Now, that point you brought up about human trafficking is very important, because people are constantly saying we have to have more troops in Afghanistan to, ready, drum roll, Protect the women. Yes, we're hearing this a lot.
Yes.
How safe are women, do you think?
Well,
there's pros and cons.
Yes,
you do understand.
yes. I mean, I think for those people who are concerned about the conditions of women and what a U.S. troop withdrawal might mean, they should just read Malalai Joya's book, A Woman Amongst Warlords. She spoke here at Willamette last April. I mean, she's traveling in this country speaking. Malalai Joya, who was a member of the parliament, and they should also read the RAWA, R-A-W-A, website, that is the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, to see what women, Afghan women in the diaspora, but also in Afghanistan, have to say about this occupation. I can summarize for them, and that is say, the women, even the ones who have been, quote, liberated, do not want to be occupied. So, it is true that the Taliban were misogynists, that women were kept in their homes, and that they were not going to universities or schools or working or just wandering around in the cities. Now if you go to Afghanistan, and I just came back June 15th, if you go in the cities, I would say about 10% of the Afghan women and girls have, quote, they have more freedom. So they can go to school, they go to university, they work in the government, they work maybe with other organizations, they can go shopping and so forth. But we're talking about 10%. 90% of the Afghan women are illiterate, and I would say 80% of them still live in the Middle Ages.
And one thing that we have seen increase is the rise of hardcore pornography being sold on the streets of Baghdad.
And
now,
on
you
the
all
streets
know
of
what's
Kabul.
here in America. Imagine them seeing their own sisters in those situations in videotapes in the bazaar. And then that's bizarre.
Well,
and that's
unfortunately,
not right.
There is internet now,
Yeah.
but the same pornography is a big problem, and people are with the parliament, and the clerics will put pressure on the Karzai government and saying, what is this? Is this freedom? Is this democracy? Is this what you want? And then he will do something for a while, and then it's back to, so for the vast majority of the women, life in fact has become harder because a lot of the men have disappeared. They're in prison. There are thousands and thousands of Afghans all over the country. There are American prisons managed by the Americans to which even the Red Cross cannot go. The Afghan government doesn't have access to that. So a lot of men have disappeared or have been killed or have been maimed, and women are left with major responsibilities in a country where, as I said, 85% of the women are illiterate, and there's no work to be done, and they have no money. So life for women, for most women, in fact, has become harder under the occupation than better and easier.
There's something else that I've also been thinking about over the past few years. My father, for example. Now, my father is someone that he and I have a difference of opinion on just about everything, but things really took an interesting turn when I began to do this show.
Yeah.
And he chose to work for the U.S. government as a contractor, not in the military, but as a translator.
Yeah.
Now, I hear that there's a lot of, this is not a safe job for him to be doing,
they
because
get
a lot of
killed
people
all the
that are
time.
assassinated.
Oh,
so
yes.
he has chosen to,
I think I would advise against it, but I don't know him.
Well, I do. You have a way of being calm about some of these things, where I am naturally emotional about some of it. How do you, just to kind of ask the question bluntly, because I was saving it tonight, how do you not get angry sometimes? How do you stay, in a way, peaceful and also have a certain acceptance about things and the world as it is without getting lost in it all?
Well, to be honest, Alex, it pains me a lot, because my mother still lives in Afghanistan. I have sisters and mothers, nephews, nieces, relatives, classmates from my older days. I have teachers and associates. I mean, I know a lot of people. So when I go, and I have been going every year for the last 10 years to help, rebuild higher education, and we can talk about education. I see this, and I understand, and I'm fluent both in Pashto and in Farsi. And I can hear things. People tell me things that they won't tell to other people or foreigners. So it's very painful for me to see this country, these people, because this was the poorest and least developed country on the planet to begin with. And there has been this war of one kind or another, occupations, wars, civil wars for the last 35 years. So you can imagine, everyone has been traumatized. Everyone has a horrible story. Every family has a tragedy. There's not a place or a family or a tribe or a person who hasn't been touched in some way, including my own family. So it does pain me, but what can you do? I mean, what I try to do, I do get mad, I do get very angry, and I, it saddens me to see my adopted country here waging war on the country of my origin, the most powerful country, and 46 other countries waging war on, my country of origin. It is painful, but my hope is that, ultimately people need to think that my hope is that we will try to think of alternative ways of solving conflicts and issues between people, between countries, between, ethnic groups, racial groups, and so forth. It would be very easy to sort of really get mad and throw a tantrum, but that doesn't help people, or it doesn't help the country. So what I have been trying to do is, I learn something here and I try to share it with the people there, my students, my colleagues, and so forth.
Right.
I learn things there, I come back here and I talk to people, I talk to whoever would want to listen to me, schools, universities, church groups, in the media, and so forth. Because I can tell you this, the Afghanistan invasion has not been the first American attack on some country, and it will not be the last one either.
Right.
There will be many more every year, you can be sure, because
or 9/11
this is
style. The Hitler's Reichstag with Poland is constantly referenced.
Yeah, well, I mean, people who know American history would say that on average the United States has intervened somewhere in one way or another every 2 years for the last century. And just in the last few months, the last year, let's say, the U.S. has been waging hot war in 6 countries. So I can't, just easily get mad. I mean, my hope is that to educate people and make them understand it. And also my hope is to sort of to encourage some moral outrage, to encourage Americans to put pressure on the government, but also to demilitarize U.S. foreign policy. I mean, many Americans don't think about that. They don't realize that Petraeus was king in Afghanistan, not only in terms of all of the foreigners, including the American ambassador, Crocker or Eikenberry or whatever, but that he has even more power than, say, Karzai had. So he, I have to say, Petraeus lost the war in Afghanistan to these people with beards and turbans and sandals. The war is lost, and he's a broken man. But he will be fine, when he's done with his CIA, then he will run for president, and he might even become another Eisenhower.
Yeah. One other thing I want to bring up, since you brought up economic issues earlier, and the 10% of the women, on average, was it in schools currently or working in some form?
About, say, in public schools, about 35%.
35%
of them are girls. And then at the university level, maybe 16% of the universities are women.
What's interesting, because in this country, in 1913, we had the Federal Reserve created, that little institution that's not a real actual federal institution, the corporate institution set up to get money for war. And so we saw this whole females liberation movement in the 1960s that many people, it's not that there isn't some freedom experienced by women today that weren't free 50 years ago. Without getting too deep into all that, but it's believed that that was set up to pull more money into the Federal Reserve System for the military-industrial complex to generate more money that can be used for destructive purposes. Everywhere the U.S. has gone, they've set up these central banks. Even China has a very interesting central bank with many Western ties and ties to Bank of America. It's amazing how much you can trace when you simply follow the money with these guys.
Well, the money issue is interesting because Afghanistan right now is in the midst of a serious financial crisis.
Of all the times to have it.
Other than the government crisis. That is to say, you probably have read in the press about last December, a year ago, or in the last 6 months, it was found out that Kabul Bank, which is the largest private bank in Afghanistan, and essentially the major shareholders are relatives of the Karzai and the vice presidents, and some other influential people. Well, $1 billion disappeared from this bank last year. People just took the money, $1 billion. And this is our money. Remember, this was our money, either through contracts. This is the bank which pays all of the civil servants. The civil servants are paid through the Kabul Bank, which is private. Teachers, the military, the police.
Well, that sounds
and
like
so forth.
justification for us to be there forever.
Well,
after all there's theft going on, I mean, we have to be there.
Well,
and yet they
to
could have
be
set
there-
up that thief to take the money the whole time.
But
and just
what
create a
happened
money
was,
laundering operation.
$1 billion was just taken out or given as loans or spent on people's campaigns, including President Karzai's campaign. And the U.S. Treasury had advisors at this bank. I mean, there are Americans in most organizations now as advisors, or shadow governments and so forth. But the IMF said to the Afghan government just about a month ago, either you clean up your financial situation or you cannot receive any more aid from any country. So the country now, which is desperate, it could use even $1 to $1 billion, is not receiving any money because of this theft, massive fraud and theft from the private bank by people who are now in government, and they just took the money.
What's wrong with me about that old phrase about money being the root of all evil?
Well, money is in a way, because you mentioned the military-industrial complex. I would expand now. That is to say, it's now the military, industrial, intelligence, terrorism, academic, media complex.
Oh, yes.
There are a lot of organizations and people, individuals, who are making a lot of money.
We haven't covered vaccinations.
Right.
There's many things coming out about the poison in the vaccine. So we're finding out stuff about Pakistan, Afghanistan, where people are getting sick from these.
Well, not just that, but the point is that, a lot of people are making a lot of money. It's estimated that since 2002, the U.S. has given about $70 billion in aid to Afghanistan. But of that $70 billion, this is a major report came out by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about a month ago. It's big. It's a big, very good report. And this report says of this $70 billion that has gone to Afghanistan, 3 cents for every dollar was spent on development and humanitarian issues. 97 cents were spent on the military, the police, the intelligence, the army. So that tells you something about the aid. That's why the country is poorer now than it was, say, earlier. And things cost more, And yet there has been very little development because money doesn't even enter the country. It goes to somebody's bank account in London or in New York.
People have been suspecting that from day one. From the moment these wars started, that this whole thing was a giant money laundering operation in addition to occupation.
Yes.
I do want to mention one thing real quick, though. You mentioned Karzai.
Yes.
And so when people want to debate about Obama, it's very sad when they fall in the racial box and they think because he's a darker shade of tone that maybe America's becoming freer, because we have examples like Karzai.
Yes.
We have examples like all of these African dictators.
Yes.
They're doing the most unspeakable things to their own people that have been installed by CIA-supported governments.
Well,
now, as you may know, some of these revolutions are funded by the CIA that are taking place in different parts of the Middle East.
They're trying to derail the revolution. I think the struggles,
but you feel there's some genuine struggles, too, taking place.
Well, the thing about Afghanistan is that we have known that Karzai and his brother and some of the other prominent people, like the former head of the intelligence, the National Security Directorate, Amrullah Saleh, the foreign minister, the whole government, Karzai said it, I heard it on television, he said, we have been getting money from the American government and CIA cash for years and years. So he has been working, for CIA. His brother, who was assassinated about 3 weeks ago, the New York Times and everybody knows that he was on the CIA payroll because he is part of the quote counterinsurgency. He has he managed the militia, the Kandahar Strike Force, Ahmad Wali Karzai. And that's why he was assassinated in his own living room. So a lot of these people, including Karzai, no one knew Karzai until December 2001 in the Bonn conference. He was produced because he was a compromise candidate, and he has no base. He really has no base. The way he deals is through peonage and patronage in compromise candidate, and he has no base. He really has no base. The way he deals is through peonage and patronage. He would make you ambassador, he would make you minister, and you'd be nice to him, you work for him, because he has no base himself. So most of the Afghan government are working for either one or other kind of foreign agency. And I'll tell you something, I have been to the palace 3 times, not recently but earlier. And there were rings and rings of security forces. Most of them were American. And at one point, it was interesting, they had a German Shepherd, which sniffs, for weapons and things. And this German Shepherd didn't understand Pashto or Farsi. The commands were in English. Does that tell you something? That the German Shepherd, which was, looking for explosives in the palace, spoke English. He understood English only.
English only.
Which is to say, that is, I think if it were not for the Americans, Karzai couldn't last for a month. He would be gone, and he would be gone in a horrible way. In fact, I can almost predict and say that I don't think he will die a natural death, no matter where he is, because this government has no legitimacy and has no credibility. It's corrupt, it's inept, it's illegitimate, it's criminal. It's like a crime syndicate, and people despise the whole apparatus. And if you go to Afghanistan, there's very little that will show that there's a functioning government here, in terms of roads, schools, clinics, security, peace, law and order. Nothing. What is done by private sector, and that's all drug money or stolen money.
There's this book that I didn't get a chance to read. My friend loaned it to me, but he's like, Alex, read it. I didn't have the time, but what it did get into is what the military did here in America to the Native Americans, to their sexual genitalia, chopping it off and hanging people, the most horrific things.
Well.
I think the very best thing people can do for their government, our government, for the people of Afghanistan is to speak the truth loudly. Don't compromise within the system, because we have to heal the damage that's been done. Is that shortly? Because I do believe in karma. And I can kind of feel in the air as I hear that there's something in my lifetime that is coming to this country because of what they did for me. And we're not talking about terrorism. We are not talking at all about suicide bombers. Now, we are not talking about Islam marching on the United States. There's something happening with the Chinese military. And what I'm seeing is the same signature patterns of them arming certain aspects of the Mujahideen before 9/11. I'm seeing directly all these military technology transfers. I'm seeing China maintain silence about 9/11. I'm seeing the Russians maintain their silence about, and I want to warn everyone about this Russia Today network, because I've been watching them. They don't have Arabs, truly, true Afghans on this network. They have white American conspiracy theorists. They're talking about everything that's wrong with America, but they don't get into I'd like to hear from you maybe some of the war crimes that Russia was involved in. They don't want to bring up that chapter. They don't want to bring up all these gangsters that are involved in this. So when I look at Afghanistan, I have learned from this situation that there is a new world order empire that is far larger than the Anglo-Saxon empire of the U.S. And these countries that act like they're against each other have worked together in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're talking about Russia, China, and the United States.
Zones of interest. Well, just to take China, for example, China has been helping Afghanistan, building hospitals here and there, doing this and that. But more importantly, about a year ago, more than a year ago, China signed the biggest contract with the Afghan government ever about copper mine. It's called the Ainak copper mine, which is about 30 miles from Kabul in Logar province. So they're working on excavating copper, which is the second largest copper mine in the world after the Anaconda in Chile. So the Chinese are up to here. And if you go to Afghanistan now, about half the products you see in the city, maybe more than half, are made in China. So the Chinese are making a lot of money out of this, while the Americans are doing the fighting. The Americans provide the security and safety. The Chinese are making the money and working on their excavation of the copper mine, for example. The Russians are going to be selling weapons and so forth to Afghanistan. So there's that going on, and as I said, I think part of the reason why the United States wants to maintain a military presence is to sort of roll back the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because that can be a very powerful military force. China, Russia,
We've been watching, we've shown
so
clips
forth.
from their drills together on the show.
Yes. As for this country, there are many thoughtful Americans, people who were born and raised here, were naturalized, but I hear it, I see it. The country seems to be falling apart, I think.
Some of us
it's like
from
Rome.
the Middle East have different experiences with racism. How have yours been since 9/11?
Well, I have never been told something nasty or been, say, rejected, refused service. really I have had no indication of mistreatment.
Yeah,
I'm sure there was subtle, maybe if it was subtle. So even at the airports, I mean, just once or twice I was singled out, you know, to be searched more thoroughly. I have never really had, you know, any bad experience, but I'm aware. I know people who have been taken away, and I know people who now can't go to mosque to pray.
Right.
You know, and I know people who are afraid here in this country,
Do you think there's something
because
more,
the surveillance is quite vast.
Do you think there's something more in brief about the Portland 7? Do you think that was a fully legitimate threat, or do you think this whole thing was fabricated? Because I believe the situation with the Somalian youngster was fabricated.
He was set up. Yes, it was a setup. Well, the same. It happens.
Now we know that we have to take care of our immediate homeland of Portland.
Yes.
Because you know what? The feds got their eyes on this city.
Yes.
And there's something about this city that they want. And they've got these mayors in their pocket.
Yes.
Mayor Sam Adams is not going to run next year.
Well, he decided not to.
Yeah.
I think it's very obvious that, I mean, my sense is, you know, I've lived here for about 40 years now in this country. You know, I've seen it change from a nice, decent, free, egalitarian, humane society to a very vicious place, to a quasi-police state.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question that there's surveillance. I mean, I assume that my emails, my correspondence, my telephone conversations might be listened to. I just assume that.
I as well.
But, you know, I'm not breaking any laws and I don't care. But, but there's every indication that our telephone company cooperates with the
and there's every
16
indication
intelligence.
This is not just about targeting Afghans in this war. They're targeting what they call white Al-Qaeda now.
Yes.
They say Jihad Jane. Have you
Yes.
heard of Jihad Jane?
Yeah,
Jihad Jane went with her
Yes.
boyfriend,
Yes.
and they went, what are they, you know, in the jungle gym there. They're
Yes,
training,
yes.
and they're in the secret
Yes.
Afghan cave.
Yes. No,
Why are they targeting a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman saying she's with
Well-
Al-Qaeda? Unless they're coming for you and your daughters too. I don't know. I wonder.
Well, you know, I mean, life is becoming hard in this country, and there's a lot of dissatisfaction. You know, this is not a recession, and it's not over. We're in a depression. I know people who, for example, can't go to school, who have lost jobs, who have lost their homes, who are really in trouble, and they're very upset, you know, and they're mad, really mad. So, and this goes on, and then, you know, there's foreign pressures. I mean, if you look at Latin America, several of these countries have elected left-of-center presidents, Peru the most recent. So, in other words, I think for the ruling class in America, there are challenges within and without the United States, and they have to resort to all kinds of ways, whether it's scapegoating some, you know, people calling them this and that, or whether it's scapegoating, you know, Americans or workers or unions or whatever, because the ruling class, you know, will maintain the status quo, and they will maintain their privileges. If that takes waging wars, so be it. You know, you have a mercenary army. We don't have a professional army, and we don't have the draft. And it's interesting, Alex, when you get on a plane in Dubai and you come to the United States, it's more than half of them are military people.
Right.
And when you look at them, none of these people even look like my students at Lewis and Clark College. They look like they're from some little town in Iowa, or they're mostly minorities.
Well, so I used to get very upset on the show in previous years about the police state and look at these things happening. I'm relaxing more because I'm starting to understand.
Well,
I'm starting to understand this truth. America can change us Americans at any moment that they want to. They could stop the wars. They could reverse a lot of harm that's been done. And I believe that there is a collective karma for the continent, this country, specifically America. So
well, it can destroy itself.
Yeah, it can, but you know, we can get overwhelmed sometimes by all the stuff going on. But living with a good, full, open heart is the best way to go about living in the future. With all this killing and deceptions, to reject those deceptions and lies. And
well, the vital signs, as they say, are not very good. Again, if you look at this country, our economy, our political system,
our diet. Which moves us to the last part of our conversation, because it's been a very great hour with you, but we were going to talk about food for the last segment. And we don't have the best diet in this country. We have McDonald's and French fries and all types of things, but Afghan cuisine, this is what I've been really wanting. We have a picture up here. And see, we have so many carts in this town. At one time, there was an Afghan restaurant on Hawthorne. But it's cool, maybe you knew him. We need an Afghan cart in this town. And maybe I'd open it.
And if you look at it, actually, for those who can afford it, the Afghan diet, it's very balanced. It's excellent. But you know, the diet, unfortunately, we have some of these chains there now. So you get pizza, you get Kentucky Fried Chicken.
They're bringing them the McD's. I heard about that, the Starbucks.
Yes. So, well, you know, imperialism is not just limited to either the military or the money or the pipeline. It comes as a total package. So, you know, it comes with prostitution, with pornography, with films, with food, with junk food, you know, with fast food, with dress, you know, with manners, with values, with education, with the English language, and with the internet. I mean, imperialism moves sort of in packages.
It does.
And you see this in Afghanistan, unfortunately, now. And there is a wealthy class who eat very, very well, but the vast majority of the Afghans right now, you know, there are parts of the country, like in the central part, where there's no drinking water. They're experiencing some of the worst drought in memory. So the majority of the people are hungry, and more importantly, 60% of the Afghans are under 25. And you know, the Americans and the foreigners don't understand that. I keep telling them, this is a young country, these are young people, you better give them something to do, like education, employment, money, a future, a hope, etc. None of that was done. So you have 60% of the population, most of whom have no work, no money, and no future, no hope. Someday there will be an Afghan Spring. And it will be because of this occupation, because the focus has been to simply you know, defeat, quote, the terrorists, you know, misnamed, but not work on development, for example, to develop the capacity or you know,
cultivate crops,
build factories or whatever. None of that. There's no development. There's no work being done to reconcile the different groups. So I'm afraid when there is the opportunity, there might be civil war, and there might be sort of an Afghan Spring. You know, these young people have had it, and they're really angry. So the Afghan food is good. They may one day be able
to take back their own country, and in a way, after some period of chaos, I think things could resolve themselves. But I'm kind of suspicious that we may be going through the same thing in our own country. A period of a civil war, if there's some sort of a meltdown. NASA has many concerns, although we're ending the show now. This is a regular topic about solar flares. And what would happen to this empire if something were to come to Earth? Perhaps it's God's will, perhaps that's a matter of preference or opinion. But there seems to be something that we as a species, who knows what it is, are about to walk into. And I think when that happens, the whole situation on Earth is going to change.
Well, Paulo Freire, my intellectual guru, said oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. So whether it's in America or Afghanistan or places in between, I think you can mislead, you can fool, you can manipulate, you can frighten, you can intimidate, you can hegemonize people for so long, but not forever. Something will happen here. Either I think the empire would collapse of its own weight, or there will be uprisings, you know, when people lose everything, can have
instead
nothing.
of looking at billions of people on the Earth as a virus, perhaps billions have been called to Earth to witness what we're about to witness. And with that, we are now out of time. Thank you for watching Outside the Box. Thank you, Zahir, for being on the show tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to cover more information next week. I hope you learned some very important things tonight. Until next week, I'm Alex Ansary, reminding you the path to the ultimate place of truth and place of power still lies within. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Afghanistan